Yeah, on.
Two twins.
Yeah. Do.
Relax.
Boom. Frankie says relax, huh?
Just relax, dude.
Tell you what, you better listen to Frankie. All right. I don't know what's going to happen if you don't, but Frankie says relax. You better relax.
True relaxation. I got to tell you, T, this was a fascinating choice. You know, when you first said it, I was like, huh?
Yeah. You know, we're going to focus, mostly on the music and the record and the impact, which was significant. But certainly right from the onset, I think it needs to be acknowledged the importance, frankly, because, these days, and this is a good thing, probably, this record probably wouldn't be that big of a deal. It'd be kind of like, well, I kind of know what those guys are going for here, but, people would just kind of take it for what it is. At the time, this was, extreme. This was controversial. This was impactful. And it was very interesting how these two different worlds that hadn't really collided a lot in the mainstream, we're talking 1984 here, were able to, through a very unique artistic statement here, and one that, as we'll get into, had a tremendous amount of success and prevalence within this time frame. So, that'll give you a little thinking as to, kind of why I decided to go with a bit of a unique choice this time. But the more I kind of dug into this and the story of it and the story of the band and then what happened to the band and the accolades around this, both from a sales and critical and commercial standpoint, it just became more and more interesting, Nub. And I just figured, what the hell? Let's go for it.
I like it. I agree with you that with the controversy at the time came one of the pivotal moments that we've had and sort of leading to where we're at in 2021, which is a much more, thankfully, much more tolerant, kind of aware atmosphere when it comes to gay culture, gay arts, things like that. But you got to cast your mind back to 1984, a much, much different time. And that's what makes the analysis of this pretty fascinating, is thinking about what it was at its time is a lot different than 2021. And again, you think about pieces of art that really influenced this. And this album is one of them. I remember for us, the movie Philadelphia was a huge moment, just in terms of awareness and understanding and kind of building towards what hopefully most people would agree is a much better place today than we would have been decades ago when it comes to, just kind of the tolerance and awareness of gay culture. And it's a great example of really outstanding art that maybe even 5 years before or 10 years before people would not have been open to or been aware of. And so, yeah, I think it holds an important place in history, maybe even more than music history. And we'll get into that a little bit as we talk about the tracks.
Well said, buddy. And listen, make no mistake. Okay. This album is very gay. I mean, you don't need to get too far into it before it's like, oh, I know what these guys are talking about, and obviously we'll talk about the pinnacle single, which actually came out beforehand, which, was another great example of, there were probably a lot of people tapping their toe to a song that, was catchy and upbeat, and probably half of them didn't realize what was actually being discussed, but they didn't care. And that's part of the thinking here in episode 42 here, Nub, is I want to know, was this album good? When you get past, and these things were very important, as we've noted, but when you get past all those things, was it a good record? Why was it important from a artistic standpoint, from a musical standpoint? Or did it just kind of catch at the right time with the right producer? We talked about producers a lot last episode with Jagged Little Pill, and obviously that's going to be a very big part of this one. But hey, what do you say before we get to that, we take a little bit of a trip round and round. Nubs, what have you been absorbing lately, buddy? Lay it on us.
First would be the album Foma from the Nixons. This is 1995.
Oh, Sister.
Yeah, that was, Sister was like the hit.
And my favorite song on that was called Wire.
Yeah, Wire is awesome.
Yeah, really good.
But I want to get in the whole album. You know, it's one of those things. I'm continuing the downsizing. I know you're about to laugh at me, but I'm continuing the downsizing of my vinyl collection.
Well, how many versions of the Nixons album do you own? That's what I'd like to know.
There's only one vinyl pressing of it. It is from 1995, and it's actually on colored vinyl. So you might actually be interested in this. It's on like turquoise vinyl.
Well, thank God. Anything we can do to basically force you to just own one copy of an album is
right. Yeah,
that's a W. That's a win.
It is interesting though, T, because in the mid 90s, there was not a lot of vinyl being pressed. For whatever reason, this album had an original pressing on turquoise vinyl. And I was sifting through and doing the downsizing, and I came across this, and it was sealed. It was brand new. So I had a brand new sealed copy of this record from 1995. And all I had really heard in the last, 30 years was the song Wire. Because as mentioned, that's, a song you and I both really like. So opened it, put it on the turntable, and it's very good. It's a lot heavier than I remember. Sister was a little bit more of not a ballad, but like a slower mid-tempo kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And they were kind of your full-on post-grunge mid-90s rock band. And it's a good record, though. It's very good. So that's first. And then second would be the album, you know the artist just from the album name, but Dirty, Rotten, Filthy, Stinking Rich from Warrant. I would say one of the better albums of this sort of cock rock era.
Oh, yeah. Oh, top to bottom for sure. It's one of those records you're amazed at how many either just singles or familiar songs are on it. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Gary, you can check on this, but I think it's 11 tracks or 10 tracks maybe. And like half of them, maybe even over half, are hits or well-known hair metal jams. So, yeah, I agree.
T, here's what's interesting about that album. It's been on my Discogs wish list for probably 2 years, and I own it. I had no idea I had it.
Oh, so you had it on your want list,
yeah,
in Discogs, and lo and behold, you owned it the entire time.
Yeah,
that sounds about right. I mean, did you ever go seek that professional help I suggested, or you going to hold off on that, or what?
Yeah, I just keep getting referred to new people. I don't know what's happening. Must be something in the process. I don't know. But and then third would be, all right, this is where I get real nerdy too with the prog stuff. But this is the band is Triumvirate, and the album is 1976's Old Love's Die Hard. This is good German prog stuff. That's what's running around for me, T. What are 3 albums that you have been enjoying of late?
Very good. Well, they just released the Live at Nebworth from Skinnerd, which is both a audio CD and then a Blu-ray, so you can actually watch the show. This is that really famous show they had outdoor during the day festival environment where Alan Collins is wearing that red outfit. It's very, very famous show for this band, and they released it. The quality isn't amazing, but you're listening to the Skinnerd Nebworth show, so it's just awesome. And it was a triumphant, set for that band. So I haven't watched the Blu-ray yet, but I've certainly listened to the show, and it's great that they released that one.
How long did Freebird clock in that performance?
I believe it was about the same amount of time as the title track of this episode's album, about 14 minutes.
Yeah, a trim 14 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The second is going back to a little Barry Manilow. I got the Barry live on Broadway, which for some reason I actually didn't have in the collection. And this has the Gonzo Hits melody and some other songs that were a bit kind of unusual per his usual, set lists and tours and those things. It's a great live collection, and that Gonzo Hits melody is really well done. I mean, it's 25 minutes, covers all the bases. It's a little bit of a tease because, there are certain songs where you don't want a 30-second snippet. You want the whole thing, right? But, it's still great. So Barry live on Broadway. And then the third is a country artist that I've been recently introduced to by one of my pals. And that's Jerry Jeff Walker, good old Texas hardcore stripped down country music. Great stuff. And this is just his best of collection on 20th Century Masters. But if you are looking for some nice, chill, old school, outlaw, summer country music, go with Jerry Jeff Walker.
I appreciate that recommendation because I've been looking for good country music for 41 years now. So thank you.
It's a ridiculous thing to say. Let's get to what many people thought was some good pop music here. I think one of the things that really defines Frankie Goes to Hollywood as a whole, but certainly this album, is it may define short-lived success more than any record in history. I mean, this was literally, an explosion within the industry, certainly within Europe, but really worldwide. And boy, did the band, they didn't really fizzle. They just sort of died after this. And there are a lot of intricacies to this album that led to its success that also probably hurt the band long term that we'll get to. But it is an unbelievable story of rapid success followed by a rapid sort of plummet. These guys certainly experienced that. And I think that's part of the fascinating story here, Nub.
Wasn't it mostly because, like a lot of commercial artists, they were starving for more creative control and they wanted to play their own instruments and stuff like that. And then they let them do it. And then the second album was just a disaster and didn't do a thing. And then they broke up basically. I mean, isn't that?
Well, should I answer that before Brian Johnson or after Brian Johnson? What do you think, Nub?
I think it should be after Brian Johnson.
You want some dirty deeds? Yeah. You want some dirty deeds?
Welcome to the Pleasuredome was released on October 29th, 1984. I think one of the most notable things about it is producer Trevor Horn. Now, we've talked about Trevor Horn before on the podcast during certainly the Yes episode. I think we've maybe even mentioned him once or twice elsewhere because he's an incredibly acclaimed producer. This was a hot time for Trevor Horn. He had actually performed vocally on a Yes album. He had produced a couple of Yes albums. We talked about 90125. He had a huge influence on that. This was a producer that was kind of on fire and clearly didn't mind taking on different projects. I mean, the difference between Yes and Trevor Rabin during 90125 era and Frankie Goes to Hollywood a year later, I would say is a fairly vast difference between those two projects. So it's a very interesting part of this. Nub, is it kind of funny when you listen through this record? And I know how much of a Yes fan you are. And obviously Drama is one of yours and my favorite Yes records, which features Trevor Horn on lead vocals. Is it kind of funny to think of him as such an important influence on Yes and then hear kind of his involvement, which is very clear on Welcome to the Pleasuredome with this band during this time?
Yes, it is. I mean, you nailed it. Within a 4-year span, he's lead singing for Yes, making arguably one of the band's kind of more progressive albums with Drama, and then he produces the commercial smash of 90125. And then before you know it, he's basically running the show for Frankie Goes to Hollywood and creating, a monumental hit and an important record there. So yeah, what a 4-year run. And if you extend it too, I mean, think about Trevor Horn doing that in the early 80s. And then remember the early 90s, who did Trevor Horn just destroy it with? Seal. The debut Seal album comes out and that's very successful. And then the second Seal album, also called Seal, just sort of destroys commercially as well. And that's like Kiss from a Rose and Prayer for the Dying and Don't Cry. I mean, the dude just had like kind of a 10-year run that saw so much diversity, but so much success. And in every case, the running theme is that Trevor Horn had a lot to do with it. Welcome to the Pleasuredome is basically a Trevor Horn album, you know? And let's not forget, before all of this, he was one of two guys in the Buggles who did Video Killed the Radio Star.
Right.
So from like 1979 to 1994, there may have not been a producer who was as efficient as he was in terms of finding incredible heights, and probably made a few dollars too, I'm guessing.
The band are an interesting group of guys. They formed in Liverpool. So they are Liverpudlians, I believe they call it. Yeah. And they actually pay some homage to a fellow group of Liverpudlians from the 60s on this record during what is kind of a cover song portion of the album. Holly Johnson is kind of the main, probably most recognizable face that you've seen in videos, and he handled most of the lead vocals and a lot of the composition. And Paul Rutherford also contributed toward most of the composition, and he was sort of a secondary vocalist and also played some additional instrumentation and those things. But typically it was Holly and Paul kind of at the forefront, and they were really the ones that kind of led, I think, most of the gay influences on their lyrics and content and tone and those type of things. That sort of, gave them a name for themselves even before this record. And we'll talk about the release of the singles. The other two band members, Mark O'Toole on bass and Brian Nash on guitar, certainly I think were the influences, the other direction of saying we want to be a band. We don't necessarily want to be this highly produced, highly pop oriented thing. We want to like play instruments and compose music and all those type of things. And while Trevor Horn was important, Nub, you got to give credit to this band. They wrote the hits. This was not a deal where a producer came along and handed them songs and created this facade of a band that's really producer driven. These guys wrote these songs. What's interesting about the way Welcome to the Pleasuredome came together is that these three singles that really define the record, and there's other tracks on there and we'll go through it, but this album's really about three songs. Before the record was released, as early as October of 1983, they released the first single in single only format. They had not released a record yet, and that song was Relax. Then the band released Two Tribes, which was in June of 1984. So, Relax stuck around for 8 months before Two Tribes came on, and that was a super acclaimed song for them. And then The Power of Love came out in November of 84. So, this was a building process. It wasn't like they dropped this record and nobody heard of them. By the time the album came out, you had basically three songs that were very well known and a lead single that was, iconic by this time. So the album was set up for success from the get-go. In fact, the advanced sales of the record were over 100 million, and it really was led by those three singles. It was released on double vinyl LP. It was UK #1 the day it came out, again, led by these advanced sales. Some Frankie Goes To Hollywood fans were a little bit critical of the record because it really contained new versions of these singles. And one of the other things we'll talk through is there are a bunch of covers on this album. So it wasn't all new material. It wasn't all original material. So, some fans, I think, maybe expected more. But as far as the mainstream goes, this album was tremendously successful. One of the things that's really interesting about it, and it gets back to this idea of band versus producer, is that Trevor Horn's production just absolutely dominated this process. To your point, Nub, it's basically a Horn record with, a few very important songs that were composed by the band. But in many cases, it's interesting. Trevor Horn told the band, don't worry about playing. I'm going to bring in session guys. Or actually, I don't know, many of you have heard of Ian Dury and the Blockheads. He actually brought in the Blockheads, which were the backing band for Ian Dury, but also they did a lot of session work around that time. I think that the friction within the band for creative control, to your earlier point, Nub, started early. And a lot of it had to do with Horn basically saying, okay, this is my baby now. This is going to sound and directionally come across the way I want it to. And if that means bringing in musicians that I want to play instead of you guys, that's the way it's going to be. I would imagine that got things off to an interesting start within those sessions, Nub.
For sure. There's always going to be a yielding of control when you have not just a big name producer, but like a big credibility producer. Somebody that comes in that knows what they're doing and knows how to get a band to the top. So, but that is where the artistic conflict comes in. And it's clearly something that played a role in the longevity, or should we say lack of longevity with his band, is there was that kind of need for artistic involvement, yet you're also balancing that with the fact that you're making millions and millions of dollars off of Trevor Horn. So
yeah.
I'm sure it was a little icy at times, but man, if you got an all-star in there, let them play,
Definitely. And they did. In 1985, the band won the Brit Award for Best Breakthrough Act. So they saw accolades right away. They also received a Grammy nomination and an MTV Video Music Award nomination for Best New Artist. So, I mean, these guys, they hit hard. They were big right away. They were acclaimed right away. And it did not take this band very long to start getting attention. They were only the second act in the history of the UK charts to reach number one with their first 3 singles. That's pretty incredible if you think about it. As sort of fragmented as the charts scene has always been in the UK, with a huge kind of variety of styles and genres and those type of things up to this time, that record eventually was broken by a group in the 90s. So, Nub, let's see if you have a guess on this. Who broke Frankie Goes to Hollywood's record of having their first 3 singles go to number one?
And you said it was in the 90s?
Yeah, I'll say mid to late-ish 90s.
Got to be a pop group. Mid to late 90s. But you said group. I actually would have guessed like Britney Spears or something like that. But on a guess, I would say Backstreet Boys or NSYNC. But if I had to choose which one, Backstreet Boys, because I think they came first.
So you're in the right ballpark. Let me give you a strong hint here.
Okay.
Late 90s. And remember, these are the UK charts, but you are dancing on it. Spice Girls.
There
you go, baby.
Okay. There you go.
Okay. And Nub, let's take this a step further. What were the 3 songs? Come on, you got this, buddy.
All right, dude. First was, if you want to be my lover, you got to get with my friends. I think it was called Wanna Be.
Ding, you're 1 for 1.
Second was, when to become one. I need someone like I never needed love before. Want to make love to you, baby. Oh, and then the cool movement of that song is, it's the only way to be. Boom, 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 boom. I don't know. Is that one of them?
I don't know. I'm just letting you go. I don't know.
Okay. I think that was To Become One.
To Become One. Very good. And then the third.
No shit. Wannabe, To Become One. Oh, I'm giving you everything. All the joy that takes. It's say you'll be there. Say you'll be there. But yeah.
Wow.
What is that called? Say you'll be there?
Wow. I mean, you got them all. Not only did you get the song titles, we got a performance on all. I mean, you know what? If you want to, sit the rest of the episode out. I mean, your work is done here. That was pretty incredible. Or was it, are you a little bit ashamed? I might
sit it out purely because of shame.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can re-enter. I don't know if a re-entry is possible in this episode.
Yeah.
I didn't like those songs or anything. I just knew them.
No, never.
Who was your favorite Spice Girl, T? Who did you fancy?
I guess I kind of liked Sporty.
Yeah, Sporty.
Who was it? Scary, Posh, Sporty,
Baby, hold on. Baby, Sporty, Posh, Scary, and then who was
Spicy?
Emma? No,
Spicy.
Emma.
Was there a Spicy?
Oh, the redhead.
What? She didn't get a cool name. Oh, she got a cool name.
What was her? What was she? Was she Posh?
I don't know.
There were 5: Baby, Scary, Posh, Sporty. I can't remember. We'll have to get that one from a listener.
Ginger Spice.
Dude, I was even going to say, the Ginger, Emma. Yeah. Okay. Ginger Spice. There you go. Yeah. Okay. Ginger.
Do you want to keep talking about the Spice Girls, or should we?
Episode 43, we'll be looking at the first Spice Girls album.
Yeah. We're just going to do a full episode on To Become One. Just, classic.
Absolutely. Very touching number. Very touching.
It really is. It really is. We'll talk a bunch about Relax when we get to it. But one of the things that's interesting, Nub, is it is the all-time biggest selling single in the UK, besides the song that actually knocked one of these singles off the charts in 1984. You want to take a crack at that one too? I'll give you a hint here. Remember, this record came out in October
of 1984.
Mm-hmm. So it was actually a second Frankie Goes to Hollywood single. But what knocked that song off the charts, and also what exceeded sales beyond Relax, which had been the top selling single?
1984.
1984.
In the UK.
In the UK.
My first instinct was Bowie, Let's Dance, but that's 1983.
I mean, think of how giant Relax was. What is the only thing that could have defeated?
Oh, dude. Okay. We Are the World or whatever. Or Do They Know It's Christmas? It's got to be.
You got it, buddy. You got it.
Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah.
Nice job. Yes. Feed the World. Do They Know It's Christmas? So
feed the world. Let them know it's Christmas time. Feed the world. I galled off, you know.
I got to say, like, ours was way better. I mean, come on.
Oh, you think?
We Are the World? Oh, way better than Feed the World. Come on.
Ooh, I really like Do They Know? Do They Know It's Christmas is like one of the Christmas songs I really like. We Are the World is cool. I tell you what's better than all of them, without question, though, is Hearing Aid. We're stars. We're stars. That's where the metal guys got together and did their thing. Remember that? Hearing Aid?
Hearing Aid. That's a great call. Yeah.
Hearing Aid was incredible.
So that was, for those of you that don't know, that was all the like hair metal guys and all the metal guys. Like I think Lemmy was on there. It was like they all got together and did sort of their version of We Are the World. It was called Hearing Aid. And what was the song called?
Stars.
Yeah.
We're stars. It's terrible.
And it's it's awful, but also amazing at the same time, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like you had like the drummer from Quiet Riot, we're it's just like the most random people.
Yeah.
It's a great video if people want to check it out.
Well, part of what's funny is Feed the World outsold Relax. But Holly Johnson actually sang on Feed the World. Not surprisingly, he was one of the top stars at the time. So his voice is actually on there. So, but that shows you the magnitude of kind of where Relax, sits in the grand scheme here. And the fact that it took basically a monumental, timeless, song with 45 artists on it around Christmas time, which is a peak time for sales, to knock Relax off of the best-selling singles of all time list. That really says something. Let's get to the wondrous stories here, Nub. Nub, I mean, listen, everybody's got a Frankie Goes to Hollywood story, right? I mean, that's just something everybody has. Well, not really, but what's yours, buddy?
Okay, super random. My true awareness of this band came from something called Hell's Bells.
Yes.
All right.
I actually had it written down, but I'm glad you're saying it first.
Okay.
Go for it,
well, then, you know what? Why don't we combine wondrous stories? We've never really done this before, but why don't we just like talk about Hell's Bells a little bit?
Sure.
Does that work?
Yeah.
So instead of like me doing it and I'll kick to you, like let's disrupt our normal routine here, too.
Go for it. I love it.
So Hell's Bells is this it's a documentary basically, and T and I had a little dabbling when we were in school of going to a private Christian school, and as part of it, part of the curriculum, as you can imagine for us too, what this all looked like was like to hear about how terrible like rock music was and how satanic, basically everything that we loved and lived for was. Yeah,
it was a Baptist sponsored school. So, I mean, this is intense.
Yeah.
As far as being pretty strict and pretty conservative. This was not like a cool Catholic private. This was a hardcore Baptist sponsored Christian school. So, yeah.
Exactly. So like literally part of the curriculum was to watch this thing called Hell's Bells, The Dangers of Rock Music. And
I'm so glad you brought this up. It's so great.
I know.
So great.
I know.
So great.
And it was hosted by this dude. I want to say his name was Jeff. I don't know why that name rings a bell, but anyway, yeah, the guy.
I thought it was Dale, but maybe it's Jeff. I don't know.
Dale. Let's call him Jeff Dale.
Same thing. Same thing.
Exactly. So he had like a great mustache and he had like a mullet.
Oh yeah, a nice feathery mullet and a great mustache. Yeah.
And I think the whole vibe was he used to be like a rock and roller, but then he got converted away from it. So anyway, Hell's Bells it was like 3 VHS tapes or something. It was incredibly long. This very, very thorough review of basically everything about rock music that contradicts, Christianity and the Bible and things like that. And like why kids should not take part in it. Right. I mean, it was basically a warning video. It was like propaganda of why kids should not listen to mainstream, as they would call it, secular rock music. We actually took it as one of the great comedy pieces of all time.
Oh yeah.
And we watched it endlessly, just purely out of.
Well, we got a copy. We wanted to watch it so bad again.
Yeah.
We found a copy of it. It's one of those deals that we watched in school, and then we're like, how do we get our hands on this? This is incredible. Like I want to watch this every week. It's so funny. And then, we also wanted to show it to our other pals who didn't, go to the same school as us. It's like, you got to see this shit that we're watching at school. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And so we would watch it in this very flippant kind of mocking way. Right. And within it are some of, we've always mentioned that T and I, when you're twins, you have this library of references and stuff. We reference this sort of inherently multiple times a month when we just talk. We'll throw out a Hell's Bells reference or a line from it, or we'll word something in the same way that the host did. And it's a great piece to watch just purely to see what kind of propaganda really looks like.
And it's on YouTube. So if anybody out there wants to watch it, it's great. It's long. It's 2 parts. It's probably like 3+ hours.
Oh, it's
the whole thing.
Yeah.
But Hell's Bells, The Dangers of Rock Music, I think is the full title of it.
And within that, there's a ton of different artists referenced, and the funniest one for us always was he's going through a bunch of artists that you should stay away from, or showed satanic imagery. I think this might have been the El Coronado part, right? Where he talks about the metal sign where you hold up, your index and pinky fingers.
Right.
That's the El Coronado.
Yeah.
And he's running through the list of artists that like did the El Coronado, and he does Rick James, Meatloaf.
And it's this just picture of like just huge Meatloaf, like with his tongue sticking out doing the El Coronado. I mean, he was basically saying like doing the El Coronado is like a sign to summon Satan or something. I mean, it was just so funny. Yeah.
And so as part of the Hell's Bells, there is a segment about Frankie Goes to Hollywood. I can't remember the exact context of it. It wasn't in one of my favorite bits. It was somewhere in there, but repetitive enough to where we knew it. And honestly, T, that was the first time I ever heard the band name.
Yeah.
Now we knew Relax just because it was MTV and it wasn't really radio for us, but the song was so familiar that and I wouldn't say I liked that song by any means, but knew it, but would have had no clue who actually did it until Hell's Bells. And then, honestly, dude, that was the first time I ever heard of it.
Well, same for me. And it was one of those deals. I kind of touched on this from the onset, but the more I learned about the band and the album and the impact and sort of what happened to the band and Trevor Horn, I mean, it just became so interesting. It was kind of like, I want to listen to this record, I want to kind of plow through this and see what's going on here. And, hey, got to the point where, I thought an episode about it would be interesting. So it's one of those deals, sort of on the deal there where you find a record that, is intriguing. Doesn't mean you have to love it. Doesn't mean that you have to give it the same amount of accolades, but boy, is this intriguing from a time period standpoint, from an artistic standpoint. And yeah, it kind of started as a giggle on Hell's Bells, but then it was sort of like, there are a lot of interesting sort of storylines and angles related to this. One of the other things I always kind of liked is, Relax is it was an anthem. I mean, it was a huge, huge song and a timeless tune, really. But one of the things I always love doing, Nub, is saying, have you ever looked at the lyrics to that song? And people be like, no, I thought it was just about like hanging out and just, and it's like, read the lyrics and then give me a call.
Yeah.
I just love the reaction, you know? So I always really thoroughly enjoyed informing people as to the true meaning of the song, because, you know, seeing their reactions is always pretty hilarious. Well, good joint wondrous story there, Nub. I think it's time we put the needle on this record and go for it. So let's do it. The record kicks off with just an intro. We're not going to play it. It's just called "The World Is My Oyster," and it's sort of a prologue more than anything else. But Nub, I'm very, very interested because of the fact that I don't know if this exists, but if there was such thing as a pop tune within this genre, within this scene, that you could argue is borderline proggy, it probably is the 14-minute title track, Welcome to the Pleasuredome. Now, Nub, were you surprised, when you sort of dug into this one, that it does kick off with a long piece like this? And what do you think of this song? I really want to know before I say anything.
Well, I was excited, like I always am when I see a long song on an album, and then you listen to it. And while I do like the drawn outness of it, I also feel like you could have accomplished what this song accomplishes in a much shorter time. And I think it gets into kind of the repetitive theme of this album, which is just this driving backbeat, like everything is just,
it was definitely meant. I mean, it's a club genre type record, and this kind of gets you off to that start, doesn't it?
It really does. Yeah. And so more twists and turns would have been cool. And I think the word I'm going to constantly use with this album is potential, because there are some tracks on this record that really could have gone somewhere if you just broke up the monotony a little bit and found a way to build in some melody. It's actually not a very melodic record. It's not. It's mostly driven by rhythm. Yes.
Yeah, 100% right.
I dig the fact that they were trying to do something epic, but to do something epic, you have to do more than just thump away. And that's sort of the theme of this record, top to bottom. It just thumps and thumps and thumps. And at some point you're just like, can I get like a melody break or, something kind of pretty there in the middle or something? And it really never does that. So,
well, you get it a little bit on the next track, but you make a great point. I mean, it is definitely it was definitely designed to be sort of based on rhythm and based on sort of a certain vibe. Now, I think it's cool. I think it's ambitious. I think it's, the fact that this took up all of side one, I think it's pretty neat. And it's a track that I don't know if I'd want to listen to it every day, but I'm certainly going to listen to it regularly, just as something that was unique, ambitious, and in some ways and in some movements during the song, kind of triumphant. But, all in all, I think it's, rather than starting off with kind of a 3-minute, thumper, I think it's kind of cool that they sort of went for it right from the get-go. And that's part of what I do dig about this whole Welcome to the Pleasuredome experience. There really aren't any rules musically or creatively, and they just go for it. And part of that's cool. And I think that was a big part of the appeal. Well, speaking of going for it, Nub, I guess the fellas really went for it here on something that really became more than just a song. It sort of became a phenomenon with Relax. So obviously this was the single that really kicked things off for the band in late '83. But the controversy it created was incredibly interesting. So the song was banned on BBC Radio. Obviously at that time, if you didn't have your song on BBC, like it had no chance. But the opposite happened. Once the song got banned, it immediately shot up to number one. The single became so popular that they actually lifted the ban, because it was also on television, for the Christmas special of Top of the Pops in late 83. Now, this is before the album even came out. So all these things are happening where you've got a smash single, to say the least, banned on radio, banned on TV. Then the thing becomes so popular that Top of the Pops of all platforms basically says we have to have these guys come on and perform this. And they did. It also led to this sort of phenomenon of a branding t-shirt campaign of Frankie Says. So, basically these t-shirts were developed that said Frankie Says Relax, or Frankie Says this, Frankie Says that. And it became a huge thing in the UK. I mean, everybody was walking around with these shirts on. And it all stemmed from this idea of expression, of censorship, of communities sort of pulling together a bit on something that became kind of anthemic. Now, it's kind of silly because when you really read the lyrics, I mean, it's very sexual. It's very graphic. But the song sort of became part of this, sort of branded effort. And one that was very 80s. I don't think those type of things could happen today, but was a huge deal. So a lot of people think of this song as kind of something silly or something graphic or whatever, but this song was actually tremendously important to the culture at the time. You said earlier you're not a huge fan of the song. I think it's great. I mean, you talk about an 80s pop anthem. This is one of them.
I do like it. Yeah, I think Trevor Horn's playing with a lot of interesting kind of rhythms and interludes here. Kind of I think about that boom, boom, boom. That's kind of a cool little catchy thing. And then I mean, there's just so much going on. So when you think about that rhythmic punch that this album sort of carries, what's cool about Relax, and one of the reasons why I think it was such a huge hit, obviously the catchiness of the chorus, but Horn is mixing in some of these little sprinkles along with that driving backbeat. And that enhanced it. It took it from what a lot of the rest of the album is, which is just this relentless kind of drive, and actually turned it into something, dare I say, melodic. I mean, the verse is not catchy because of its melody. It's catchy because of its rhythm. But there's enough melody there to make it a pop hit for sure. But I think the thing you touched on is more significant than any of this, which is that it was one of the great early examples of that. If you make something a forbidden fruit, it's only going to make it more popular. And how many times has that been ripped off since this happened? Now, it was accidental, right? I think looking back to think about that the song was banned is just ridiculous. But everybody learned that sometimes just creating controversy will drive sales, will drive attention. That was an important lesson. Now, one that we've abused to death by the year 2021, but one that in 1984 was important for people to learn about, that you can actually create mystery and intrigue about something by sort of deeming it inappropriate. And no matter what, everyone's going to make buckets of money because it's going to sell millions of copies. So there you go.
Yeah. Holly Johnson said, he didn't calculate this like extreme graphic song that's going to get banned one day. I mean, that wasn't his thinking. He was actually walking down, he says, Princess Avenue in Liverpool, and just kind of came up with the beat and the lyric on his way to a rehearsal. It wasn't like, let's create something that's going to, challenge censorship or whatever. I mean, he just kind of said, this is a cool, bouncy beat and lyric. The key was when Trevor Horn saw the band perform a very early version of Relax on a small TV show called The Tube. And it clicked with Horn. He just said, this is a hit. I know this is a hit. Let me get my hands on it. Because the early version, Horn said it was more of a jingle than a song, when he first heard it, but he knew there was something there. And it almost seems like that was the moment where Horn kind of said, if I could just, get my mitts on this song and on these guys and sort of mold them into a certain sound in a certain direction, I know this is going to be huge. And boy, it sure as hell was. So the record proceeds with The next 5 songs are kind of interesting. 4 of them are covers. Nub, why don't we just we'll group those together here and talk about them quickly, and we'll play a couple bits. But the first is War, obviously a well-known tune by, is it Edwin Starr?
Edwin Starr. Yeah.
Edwin Starr. There you go. It's sort of led by this Ronald Reagan sound-alike. So it's a little bit of like a comedy piece for the first half. And then they sort of kick into the main jam. They cover a song which was originally called Ferry Cross the Mersey. And this is the Jerry and the Pacemakers tune. Now they do this shortened version of it, but paying a little bit of homage to their Liverpool influences. And as I mentioned earlier, the band that they actually broke the record on #1 singles from in the UK charts. Then they do a cover of Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run, which is actually pretty cool. And then they do a cover of San Jose, the old Burt Bacharach tune. So why don't we just give you a quick, bit from each of those. This is a little bit from War.
Coupled with immense pride.
It's a very, very kind of funny, interesting version of War, kind of clubbed out. There's also a track in there called Tag. And this is a Prince Charles impersonator, just sort of ruminating about orgasms, so it's like, 30 seconds long. It's just kind of funny and weird. But then you get into the Jerry and the Pacemakers cover. So this is called Ferry.
So ferry, cross the Mersey, 'cause this land's a place I love, and here I'll stay.
It's actually a pretty cool take on that song, actually. If you listen to the original, it's kind of a spacey, a little bit more ambient. I think that's actually a pretty cool moment on the record, particularly when you consider, that they're paying some tribute to their fellow, Liverpool influences there, Jerry and the Pacemakers. Then they give a little homage to the Boss here with Born to Run.
Sprung from cages on Highway 9, home wheel fuel injected and stepping out over the line. Oh, baby, this town rips the bones from your back. It's a death trap, it's a suicide rap. You've got to get up.
Now, what do you think of that one? I think it's pretty cool.
I do too. I would get killed for this in certain circles, but I kind of like it better than the Springsteen version.
I agree.
And I've never been a huge Born to Run. I'm very picky about my Springsteen.
Yeah.
Very. Yeah. I mean, I think there's been moments where Springsteen was just brilliant, The Rising and Nebraska and, some of the other earlier stuff, but The River. And then there's just moments where Springsteen is like unlistenable, just awful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've never held Born to Run, the song, up and even close to the, stratospheres that many rock fans hold it up to. So I don't know, man. I might dig this one better.
I kind of agree. And you hear them being a band there too. They're just jamming. Like they're jamming on a song that obviously they liked. It's a cool version of it. And I think that's one of the moments on here where you hear the band being a band, which is cool. And then the last piece of this sort of cover section is San Jose.
Do you know the way to San Jose? I've been away so long, I may go wrong and lose my way.
I mean, again, this is part of what, whether you like this or not, you got to respect the no rules. I mean, they go from a cover of Born to Run to this cover of San Jose. For no reason. It's, I don't know. There's something neat about just the lack of any boundaries whatsoever on this thing. So took a little off sequence there, but that's kind of the grouping of cover songs. And Nub, did you have anything else to add on that?
No, I just, more covers, I would say. I kind of dig the covers on this album more than a lot of the originals. So
Yeah. Well, this next song was probably the most acclaimed on the record, and this is called Two Tribes. So this is the second of the three number ones. So you had Relax in October of 83. This is Two Tribes in June of 84. Now listen to this nub. Johnson, Gill, and O'Toole wrote the song. So three of the four band members received the 1984 Ivor Novello Award from the British Academy of Songwriters, Composers, and Authors for Best Song Musically and Lyrically in 1984. Pretty incredible. Now, part of the appeal of this song is lyrically, it is pretty interesting. It's fairly political. It's something that dug a little deep, I think, compared to most of the other things on the record. And, this sort of was all part of this Frankie Says campaign. This song and Relax both, really were big elements of that. It stayed at number one for 9 weeks. And it was the first song to do that since the song from Grease, You're the One That I Want, which, as you know, in the UK is like a huge song. Like people just can't get enough of that song. It's like one of their like timeless, deals. So, it sold 1.5 million copies and to this day is a top 30 selling UK single of all time. And in 2015, the song was voted by the British public as the nation's 14th favorite 1980s number one song, which obviously there were a lot. And that's pretty steep competition. So I don't really understand it. I mean, I think, again, you have to put it in the context a little bit. And these guys just really striking while the iron was hot. I mean, I don't think it's that great of a song, but boy, it had a huge impact critically and culturally at the time.
It's an accomplishment for sure. I mean, was there a connection to it? Did it become a stadium anthem or something like I do wonder how it got so famous.
And probably in the clubs. I mean, which obviously, again, this album is really, I think, directed. I think Trevor Horn really understood that culture and that importance. So I think that's where, but I mean, clearly this thing was a huge, mainstream, critically acclaimed hit from this album.
I do like the fact that it's sort of the first and maybe only song on the album, aside from the covers, where they just don't sound like just a bunch of totally horny guys. Like it's got some references.
Totally, yeah.
It's got references that are a little more introspective and relatable, I would say, than a bunch of guys just talk about, just how much they love to get it on and stuff. So I kind of dig a little bit more depth to it. But yeah, I agree with you. Important song, but I'm shocked at just how revered it is in the UK.
There's no better segue than what you just laid out, Nub, for the next song. Wish the Lads Were Here. I'm sure they wish the lads were here to, have a cookout or, maybe play checkers or something. I mean, that's why they want the lads there, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Just for some male bonding.
It's a funny, it's a kind of a funny little jam. And that takes you to another interesting instrumental ballad called The Ballad of 32. Now, other than the kind of sex noises at the end, it's actually a pretty song. It's something where, again, you hear instrumentation, you hear them being a band. It's kind of interesting to stick a instrumental here. And this next song, I think this is the area where you do kind of hear, coming off the covers, moments where it's the band being a band and doing what I think at least a couple of the members intended. You can really hear that this is something that could have come out of a jam rehearsal session. And I think that comes through with the next track, Crisco Kisses. It's a little more of its time. something that, again, you could see them kind of working out in a rehearsal space or whatever it may be. And I think particularly for, the other two band members, other than Rutherford and Johnson, this is probably the type of direction that they wanted to go. And this reminds you a little bit of their follow-up album called Liverpool, which was, the band playing the instruments and a bit of a return to a more traditional approach.
The other connection I get on this track, T, finally, is the connection to ABC, which is another Trevor Horn. We didn't mention it earlier in his sort of decade or 15 years of
great
dominance,
point.
but
great point.
This song sounds a lot like it was off the Lexicon of Love. And I think it has to do with some of that orchestration sort of elements. And even vocally, this sounds quite a bit like what was going on with ABC. So first kind of moment where it sounds like, oh yeah, that connects back. Cause as we mentioned, it was very, eclectic 15 years for Trevor Horn, but I'm hearing shades of Lexicon of Love here for sure.
It's a great point. And I think you touched on it early with kind of the potential piece of this album. There are moments here that probably paved the way for some new sounds. Horn deserves a lot of credit for that. The band deserves a lot of credit for that. But I think you hear that as well on Crisco Kisses, something that, perhaps paved the way for some of those sounds that you would eventually hear in ABC, the Trevor Horn Project. A great example of that. We move on with Black Night, White Light.
And then right into the
Yep. Now it's a short section, but it does take you into that club beat, which is obviously, I think it's kind of a cool reoccurring identity of the record, and you get it early on with the title track. I think the song's pretty good. I think that some of the keyboard layers happening, it's a little bit more directional. It's a little bit more melodic, to your point earlier about not having a lot of that on the record. I think Black Night, White Light is kind of a high point here in the back half of the album.
No doubt. I think it's a high point on the album. I mean, just purely from a songwriting perspective, it's, certainly top 3, maybe even top 2 in terms of just composition, because it's got a chorus that, there's some elements to, there's more to it than just sort of the club sound. And I do like how, it always goes back to the, those fake bongo, the fake congas and bongos are a huge part of this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
But I like how I mentioned at the beginning, right? Like just some more variation. And you finally kind of see that here late in the album with this one.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. Some of the variation, some of the kind of diverse sounds you get here toward the end, I think are actually pretty functional and pretty good. Getting toward the end here, this is The Only Star in Heaven.
Hey, guitar
instrumentation, riffing. I think it's great. I mean, listen, I think that this, these two songs kind of pieced together here are a really nice part of the album, honestly. So, Black Night, White Light into The Only Star in Heaven. And then obviously what we'll get into next was part 3 of kind of the 3, smash singles. The Only Star in Heaven, I think, is really nice. What do you think?
Love it musically. Love it. It suffers from kind of a ridiculous vocal performance, which is sort of trademark for the album. The album does have some musical moments that, again, potential you really could do a lot with, but
yeah,
vocally, I just, it doesn't take advantage of the riffing and some of the things you mentioned. This could have been a really cool moment, almost like Style Council-ish, like kind of frantic.
Yeah.
And the jagged guitar thing, but the vocals distract for me. So love the music. Don't really like the melody and the vocal line.
The final song of the record was certainly one of the biggest hits. This one also hit number 1. Now this one only stayed there for a week and was also impacted by Do They Know It's Christmas, because this was released in November of '84. it's often thought of in the UK as kind of a Christmas song. I'm not really sure why, but it was probably just the time period that it came out more than anything else. But this was a huge song off this record called The Power of Love.
The power of love, a force from above, leading my soul. Flame on burn desire.
I mean, it's pretty. Again, I think to your point, the musicality of it is really strong. The vocals okay. I'm sure there are some covers out there with a more emotional vocal that are probably pretty good. I get why it was a hit. I don't really like it that much, but it's very British, and I think that, again, when you put it in the context of when it came out and even the time of year that it came out, clearly people latched onto this as sort of a holiday song, which is interesting. And the UK is funny like that, how they kind of, are so good at carving out these sort of buckets for things. And this one certainly found a niche and found an audience and was a huge hit number one.
And still the case, because I think this song scripted the playbook for 30 years later with It's a Sign of the Times. You got a better baby, the Harry Styles song, right?
What the hell?
It's almost the exact same song.
I don't know this song. Keep singing it. Keep going.
Oh, Harry Styles, Sign of the Times?
Keep going.
Quit drying your eyes. It's a sign of the times. You got to get away from it. It was like, I don't know, 5 years ago. Harry Styles left One Direction, and it was like his big hit. You don't know this?
I am loving all the Nubs vocals on episode, episode 42. It is on fire.
It's like a draggy, open ballad but Harry Styles, he gives this like powerful vocal. You probably like the song, actually. It's got the orchestration at the end and the whole shot. It really sounds like it's running the playbook of The Power of Love. It almost sounds like identical songs. It's like the producers that control Harry Styles said, we got to do something that's like The Power of Love from Frankie. So almost eerily similar in just the structure and feel of those two songs.
Interesting. Yeah, you can definitely sense the, obviously there were British, pop ballads before this, but you can sense that this definitely was influential as far as building and producing and sort of the treatments around the direction of these, ballads that were huge chart toppers in the UK throughout the remainder of the decade. The album ends with just a track called Bang.
Frankie C. Frankie say no more.
Frankie say no more. And that's it. There is certainly a tongue-in-cheek element throughout this whole album. It's not an album that takes itself seriously, which is, I think, another thing artistically that, you can appreciate about it, whether you like the actual music or not.
That Frankie guy sure is bossy though, isn't he? He's always telling us what to do.
Yeah. I mean,
goodness.
But like I said before, you better do what he says.
Yeah, you better.
Tell you what. So that wraps it up. I mean, it's an adventurous album. Certainly. I mean, there's a lot of tracks and a lot of different directions. We kind of clustered together the cover song section to try and section it out a little bit there. But Nubs, did this one matter?
Yeah. The album matters. It's an important 80s album. Very important for gay culture and the arts. One step in a very long process of building further, awareness and tolerance and kind of getting us to a much better place in 2021 than maybe the world was in 1984. So all those things make it important and make it matter. I also do like, you mentioned this many times, there were great points just about the unabashed creativity. They did everything they wanted to do, and the thing was still successful. And that's a good lesson. It's a very, very important lesson for people to remember that sometimes if you just let the producer and let the artist do whatever the hell they want, that you can still, in your words, move a lot of units and you can still achieve something commercially and creatively at the same time. And so for those reasons, it definitely matters. It reminds you of that time, especially in the mid 80s where things were so plastic, right? I mean, everything was so driven by, what was going to be the hit and what was going to be on MTV and what was going to have the image and blah, blah, blah. It is kind of cool that they have this hit album that literally did whatever the hell it wanted to do at all times. So you got to respect that. What do you think, T? Does it matter?
Yeah, I agree for the same reasons. The lack of boundaries artistically, the lack of rules, I think is really interesting. And so culturally, it certainly had an impact, but I think creatively it even had an impact, and we talked, last episode about Alanis and about Glenn Ballard and the ability to kind of create commercial production, but also with a lot of authenticity from the artist. And Jagged Little Pill captured that perfectly. I actually think Welcome to the Pleasuredome captured that pretty nicely. This is a group of guys that knew they wanted to do something unique, knew they wanted to do something out of the box, knew that they wanted to do something that didn't have any rules. And Trevor Horn was able to take it and make it a commercial statement, but also, maintain that authenticity. Balancing those things is very difficult, and I think that's part of the reason why this caught on. So yeah, I think it had, plenty of importance around that time. And it's a very interesting thing to revisit. I mean, again, even if you pull the needle off the record and say, I don't know if that's for me, you've got to respect the sort of contextual element of what this album meant when it came out and toward the audience in particular that it hit, which was much more mainstream than niche-y, as we see as we kind of plow through it and look at some of the accolades and some of the reception. All right, now let's do the final cut on this one. Are you putting it on the turntable? Are you putting it in the collection? Is it collecting dust for ya? Or are you taking it to the for sale bin? What do you got, buddy?
I have to stay true to history and putting Welcome to the Pleasuredome in the for sale bin because I actually did. Bought the album, was intrigued by it, saw the opening track, saw some of the things that I thought, ooh, this will be great. And it just never caught on. It would never became something that I needed in my collection for any reason, mostly because the couple things on it that I might use as a reference point, you can find elsewhere. And the album, it just doesn't have enough variation, and that being said, it's incredibly all over the place, right? But it doesn't have enough variation of things that are memorable for me. It's just, it goes by so easily. It's almost like background music to me. So I love the choice and love the analysis of the album and love its place, but it's in the for sale bin for me just because simply I really would never listen to it top to bottom. And I actually did put it in the for sale bin. I think I got $4 for it. So there you go. See where you got it in the final cut.
I'm on kind of a collecting dust streak here, but I'm going to go with that again. And, totally understand your position there. I don't think it's an album that you necessarily need to own, right? I think there are singles you can pick from it, but it's just so interesting. It's just so, I do think it was important. I do think it's within its context of the time, really fascinating to revisit. The way the band fell apart after this is part of the story, and, there was a kind of a fight for creative control. There were two guys within the band that I think liked being, sort of a gay act, if you will, and two members of the band that didn't really like that. And so you had some dissension amongst the band. You had some friction between band and producer, and you had a band that wanted to sort of get back to its raw sort of approach. And they did that on their follow-up album, Liverpool, which is actually quite good, but commercially it was just horrible. And the band was done. So, I mean, this really all happened within basically a 2-year span. And, there have been some reunion things, and Holly Johnson has gone on the festival circuit, with the 80s rewind stuff and all that. But as far as Frankie Goes to Hollywood goes, an incredible surge of success that was very quick and very short lived. And for all those reasons, I do think it's a really interesting thing to kind of revisit. So I'm going to go collecting dust. I'm on a roll now. I'm on a streak with collecting dust. So, hey, let's just keep rolling with it. Eh?
I like the consistency. Absolutely. We'll see what happens next week though. We'll see if you continue with the streak.
Well, we shall see. I mean, shoot, I'd like to get one on the turntable. It's been a bit. But before we sign off here, why don't we cool down? I mean, it gets a little hot with Frankie there, doesn't it? You need to cool it down a little bit, maybe ice down a little bit. So let's do that with Dolores here. Nubs, what's in your head, buddy?
First would be a little 1965. Yeah. Whoa.
Yeah.
Thunder Kiss 65, which of course contains one of the great riffs of all time with
Absolutely.
Boy, that Rob Zombie could sure make a simple riff, couldn't he? I mean,
I still think More Human Than Human is like one of the greatest songs of that decade easily.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's really good.
That is a jam. It's
really good.
You know, kind of combining kind of the electronica that was still pretty unique at that time with kind of this driving metal thing. I mean, yeah, it was in a great vocal. I mean, yeah, that song was awesome.
Absolutely. Second would be Somebody to Shove from Soul Asylum. That was the breakthrough hit off of Grave Dancers Union. And then lastly would be Hold On by Yes, but not the Yes version. I recently got a DVD of the kind of 2 or 3 years ago, Anderson, Rabin, Wakeman did a tour in their version of Yes. And the version they did of Hold On is just incredible. Wakeman does a cool little keyboard thing during the chorus. And
oh, nice.
So I've been listening to that a ton lately. So
excellent.
That is what is in my head. T, what is in your head?
I have Amy Grant. And this is Find a Way off of her album Unguarded. Just a great song. Love it. Love me some Amy. Hey, we talked about the Baptist, high school. Let's get some Christian pop going in there, right?
That's the love will find a way, like that one.
A way to go. Yeah.
Nice.
It's a real beauty. The second, we're going to go with a band that I've mentioned a couple times on here called BM Links. This song is called The Outlaw Jimmy Rose. Just a freaking, it'll blow your head off if you let it. Absolute jam. Song that I still don't understand why it wasn't a bigger hit. And then the last one is an old failure jam. We talked about Ken Andrews and my starstruckness with him in the Q&A episode, and Heliotropic, which is not a song it took me like 10 years to really understand, but has become certainly one of my favorites there toward the end of Fantastic Planet.
Isn't that what's cool about that album though, is important as it was to us, you still every once in a while can hear something in it where it's like, oh yeah, like I didn't pay that much attention to that song back in the day, but now it really resonates. No
question. Maybe an album that we'll talk about someday. New Blaze. What do you think?
I think that would be a lot of fun.
Well, as for now, we're going to wrap episode 42, which means next week we'll be back with episode, carry the 243.
Let me get my abacus out.
Yeah, 43. 43. Yep, it is. Nub, thank you, buddy. I know that was an interesting choice, and hopefully you all enjoyed it. A little something different.
Frankie says, I love you, T.
Well, Frankie says, I love you too, buddy. And Frankie also says, that's a wrap on episode 42. We will see you next week here on Two Twins and an Album.
That's about it. That's all we have. I hope it wasn't too disappointing. We will see you on tour. Until then, take it easy.